Sir, doubtless you and every other person accustomed to reflect on his duty will readily acquit me of entertaining the desire to cause a sensation among your readers, by calling upon you to expose and cause to be investigated a practice so horrifying and so often repeated uptown in this metropolis that I question whether its parallel could be found in any other civilized community in the world. First, let me observe that I am employed in the contract shop on Blackwell's Island among the prisoners, and the scenes I shall relate had several respectable witnesses besides myself, including some of the keepers, all of whom are prepared to corroborate my statement whenever required to do so. Situated directly opposite the contract shop between 57th and 61st Streets, New York, and isolated from the larger and commonly traversed arteries of this great city, is a wild and rugged spot comprising hills, rocks, and trees, and one or two dilapidated wooden erections. Near the water's edge, East River, the ground takes a somewhat abrupt acclivity, thus affording to us in the contract shop a fair view of what may be going on there. The spot described will one day terminate 58th, 59th, and 60th Streets. Alas, too often is it the case that brutes in the human form divine have decoyed loving, trusting ones of the weaker sex to this naturally charming and picturesque spot, and there, with the eyes of husbands, brothers, and fathers in the contract shop fixed upon such villains, but with no opportunity to fly to the rescue, are ruined by the fell seducer. Often have we been spectators of scenes of women's anguish, and our whole being has been subject to tumultuous commotion, our hearts throbbing with painful emotions, but the river flowing on between us and the destroyer has compelled us to let him go unpunished and in triumph. But in view of the gross enormities which I will now proceed to narrate, mere individual acts of depravity and dishonor shrink into insignificance. Some 3 weeks since, about 5 o'clock in the evening, two females were walking in the secluded spot alluded to. We saw 3 men approach them, then 3 others, again 2 others added themselves, then came 5 more. In all 13 men surrounding 2 unprotected women. We saw the women pursued and heard their screams. We saw them fell to the earth like oxen, and we saw them ravished by several of the villainous crew, while the others looked on at the awful work. One of the unfortunate females in particular became the object of such brutal and indescribable usage that we who witnessed it were made sick with horror. The villains now walked away from their prostrate victims, whom we could see stretched out upon the ground with torn garments and disheveled hair, but as if dissatisfied at the completeness of their horrid work, several of them returned and re-perpetrated their fiendish acts. It was now 1/4 of 6 o'clock, our usual time for quitting work. Our boat was ready, and 25 men, breathing vengeance against the monster, stepped into it. The oarsmen worked lustily, and as we neared the opposite shore, we stood up in the boat and shouted menacingly to the inhuman wretches, who replied defiantly. We landed at the usual place, 61st Street, and ran hard, but had to take a circuitous route to come up with the villains. But, coward-like, they ran away. A policeman was brought to the ground. He took charge of the poor women, and we heard no more of the affair. On Wednesday last, July 8th, a scene still more horrible was enacted on the same accursed spot, it occupying over 3 hours, from 1 to 4 o'clock p.m. A female walking in that retired spot was attacked by from 15 to 20 men. She was knocked down and dragged along the ground, close to a wooden boathouse, and there was ravished by one villain after another, then beaten, kicked, and dragged to a distance, apparently lifeless. Several of the monsters had been detailed as pickets, while the remainder abused the wretched woman. She was then lifted up by 2 of the men and seated against a tree, and the rascals who had perpetrated so vile and monstrous a crime walked away to look out, while the other villains attacked the now helpless woman. They dragged her down the hill to the boathouse, and in turn again ravished their almost senseless victim. Horrible to relate, this tragic scene was enacted over again. Then she was left in her indescribable misery. Soon after 5 o'clock we saw some men, who had been attracted to the spot by the shouts of some boys bathing near the spot, come and take the woman away. There are 2 ways of access to this locality, one from 57th Street, the other through a gateway foot of 58th Street. Here in fine weather, maids, wives, and widows come to walk, to read, or to look about them, ignorant of the proximity of such danger. The press should trumpet forth the above facts. Husbands should caution wives and daughters to avoid this plague spot. The police should be put on the alert to capture these scoundrels, one of the most prominent of whom was a fellow with only one leg, and who walked with a crutch, and wore a soldier's uniform.